So, this happened last year, lasting around 9 months. I'm from Bermuda. Yes, like the triangle. And I was in Leesburg, Florida for college. I've always had a hard time making friends, and since I was new, I had an even harder time. So I used Tinder to find friends, or potential partners. I was on Tinder one day after striking out with someone previously. I saw my ex's profile and figured I could do worse, so I swiped, and we matched. I realized now that he was a rebound. He told me that he was in an open relationship at the time, and about things his boyfriend did to him, so I felt bad for him. During the first 2 dates, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I spent a few days over at his parents' house, and I found out what his home life was like, which made me feel even worse for him. Turns out, he'd been homeschooled all his life, and his parents were/still are degenerates. One night we were at his place and he told me he loved me, but it had been only a week at this point. Honestly, that alone should have been a red flag, but I ignored it. Fast forward to when I was in Bermuda for the summer. It was 4.5 months of agony. At the time, my ex was overly dependent and problematic. If I said even the slightest thing wrong, normal talking points, like things I noticed that were particularly unhealthy, or things that impacted me negatively, I was in for at least an hour of self-pity and deprecation. I was stressed every day. I was pretty much having to walk on eggshells for 4.5 months, to the point where I nearly dumped him. And I should have. It was also during this 4-month period that I learned a lot of unsettling things that I wrote off, but shouldn't have. He told me he was a necrophile. He joked about being a serial killer, but was partially serious. And the list goes on, but those are what I could remember off the top of my head. Unfortunately, rather than dousing these flames, I only fanned them. I got back to Leesburg, and things only got worse from there. The pity and deprecation got worse. My ex even outed me to his dad, who is xenophobic. It was an accident, but I don't care. It was shitty. This also could have ended our relationship. I was taking care of him in such a way that I was essentially his parent. I even had to teach him to look both ways before crossing the street. I didn't know I had a savior complex at the time, and my therapist pointed it out, and that because of the savior complex and my pity for my ex, I was burning myself out, catering to him, and that I needed to get out of the relationship ASAP. It took me a while to do it, but I eventually did. When I broke up with him, I explained how I felt, and what my therapist had said. I told him the only thing that would change would be that we weren't technically in a relationship, but that was it. Nothing else would change. Not even 2 days after, he tried to kill himself while he was on the phone with me. Fast forward to Thanksgiving. I was with my current girlfriend visiting her family, and I sent a DM to my ex asking him a question. I ended up finding out that when he and I met, he wasn't actually in an open relationship, and that he had used me to cheat on his boyfriend. I told him I didn't want him in my life anymore, and that was that. I wish that was the end of the story, but it's not. It was getting towards Christmas, and I was doing terribly. I was trying to improve my life, but nothing was going right. I lost my other girlfriend at the time. I'm polyamorous, by the way, and lost most of my friends. Even my roommate's girlfriend was actively trying to get me kicked out of our apartment. I foolishly let my ex be my friend again because I couldn't take being alone, but he was worse than before. The abuse was subliminal before, but now it was outright. When he was sober, he was okay-ish, but when he wasn't, he was abusive. He claimed he loved me, but treated some transphobic girl he met in the psych ward who he knew was using him. better than he treated me. When I called him out on it, he threw a fit. A few days later on the phone with him, I ended up having a panic attack and bawling my eyes out. I hadn't cried for 4 years before that. My current girlfriend was my saving grace and helped me to finally get my ex out of my life for good. So yeah, let's not meet again, where you're losing teeth. This isn't so much one single encounter, but it was a terrifying experience. I've never told this story to anyone besides the police, but I've been thinking a lot about it lately, and only recently realized how much the whole thing really fucked me up. So, here goes. I met this guy at a bar one night. We had a great time, partied all night, and eventually ended up back at my apartment. After that night, he basically lived with me instead of the hostel he was staying at. We clicked right away, and I enjoyed having him there. We dated for about 3 months before the first night he attacked me. It was the night of my 30th birthday we celebrated. Had a blast, and passed out at about 3 a.m. He had told me he suffered from PTSD and night terrors. He had woken up many nights freaking out. I was deeply passed out when I awoke to 5 quick blows to the head and face. I tried to cover myself, not knowing at all what the fuck was happening, when I realized my arms were pinned at my sides. He was sitting on my chest, with his legs on my arms, and strangling me before I had any idea where I even was. I only remember the light fading and going black as he squeezed harder on my neck. When he let go, the blood eventually rushed back to my brain, and I remember seeing him walk to the bathroom. At that point, I grabbed the dogs and ran to my car and took off. He must have passed back out. He called me hours later, completely confused as to where I went. I told him everything he had done, and he promised me he didn't mean to do any of that. He would never do that on purpose, and he promised to seek help. I agreed to come back on the terms if he even scared me again. He'd be gone. Exactly 1 week later, again in my sleep, I woke up to him on top of me, but not doing anything. I slowly pushed him off and pretended to be getting ready for work. Out of nowhere, he jumped up and sucker punched me in the mouth. I fell onto the bed, and he again tried to strangle me, but this time I didn't fight and pretended to pass out. He let me go once he thought I was passed out and went to the kitchen. As soon as he left, I grabbed my dogs again and booked it to the car. I jumped in the car and locked it. This time, he chased me. That was when I realized this wasn't some PTSD nightmare sleepwalking freakout. He was a psychopath. He was awake and very coherent. He was screaming that he'd burn my house down if I didn't come out, trying to break the windows to get into my car. As soon as I got the doors locked, I called the cops. He went back inside. When the cops arrived, I told them he's crazy and might try to attack them. When they went in, he was quietly waiting for them and went with them without any resistance. He knew what he did. It wasn't until during the trial that I found out there was a knife in my bed. When he let go of me and went to the kitchen thinking I was passed out, he went to get a butcher's knife and left it on the bed when he chased me out. No one can prove what he was planning, but I am convinced he was going to stab me to death. He wasn't charged with anything in the end, because the DA pulled some fancy lawyering maneuvers and tricked him into walking right into the arms of ICE as soon as he left the courthouse. I have to say, that was satisfying to watch. He was deported and banned from the country. He still tries to contact me on social media by making new accounts to try to get me to help with his appeal to be allowed back. Nope. He still claims he wasn't awake for any of this. I don't know what I believe, but I know I feel a fuck of a lot safer with him on the other side of the globe. I've been having a hard time sleeping since then. I kind of brushed everything off and carried on with my life as if none of this ever happened. Thinking about it recently, I realized being attacked in your sleep and coming that close to possibly being a murder victim might cause some lasting psychological damage. I am considering seeking help. I think maybe sharing the story for once might be a healthy first step.